In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a narrow stance bodyweight squat on a slant board. Now, a movement like this is fantastic to learn how to load the knee a little bit more in a squat-like pattern. We often avoid high degrees of knee flexion, but as long as we have a tolerance and capacity in the knee joint, it actually is a lot more beneficial for us to learn how to load the knee in high degrees of knee flexion. The idea being that if the range of motion is there and we don't do a lot of our strengthening work in those end ranges of motion, we leave ourselves more vulnerable in terms of our body because it is weaker when it gets into those positions, as opposed to very sort of hip dominant positions that we're all very used to, hip hinges, squats, stuff like that. It's looking at these movements where we get into high degrees of knee flexion that can have an overall positive effect on our strength in our legs, our ability to handle load in those end ranges. Okay, so with this, the slant board doesn't have to be specifically done on a slant board. This can be with the heels elevated, but I like the slant board because it means that the feet are actually going to be flat, and we can certainly get into a slightly higher position with the heels, and this will allow us, as opposed to, say, a squat position without the slant board, we're definitely not going to be able to get as high a degree, level of dorsiflexion because of the starting position, whereas when we elevate the heels, we can see that we can get greater amounts of sort of like that knee over the toes, and we can sit into a much more upright position, loading the quads, loading the knees in a much deeper position as well, okay? The narrow stance just means that we're probably going to be focusing a lot more on the quads as opposed to the hips, and we're also going to double it up by focusing on a much more upright torso. So all of the things that we're doing here leading to us actually loading what would be the quads and the knees a lot more. We're doing this body weight at first because we just want to learn how to really contend with our body weight, and there's already even a few adjustments that we can make if we are finding sort of the end range position quite difficult. So it's all about working within a range of motion that feels comfortable for you and that your knee can tolerate at this moment in time, okay? So a nice narrow position. The idea here might be to sort of stand with sort of hip width first and then go a little bit narrower with the feet nice and straight. You're going to take your time certainly on the first few reps. You want to keep a nice upright torso. The way I want you to think of this is imagine that a piece of rope is pulling the crown of your head up towards the ceiling. You have your hands out as a counterbalance as well. But as you go down into the position, you're focusing much more on the knees traveling forward and your hips sitting straight down onto your heels. It means that we're not going through what would be maybe a more typical squat where we'd sort of allow ourselves to actually fold over a lot more. We are trying to stay as rigid and upright with the torso as we go down. So as we take it nice and slow, we're just going to find out what depth we feel comfortable with. So that high degree of sort of knee flexion and the knee traveling over the toes, we're going to pause. We're just going to see where we feel comfortable. And each rep, we just test the range of motion, going slightly deeper each one. Test running and seeing, okay, where's my tolerance within the knee, getting into that high degree of knee flexion. If we find that pain is coming on at a certain point, then we're going to avoid the range of motion that it potentially comes from. It's not that we're going to avoid the pattern completely, it's just where we currently are in terms of our capacity. And over time, you're definitely going to be able to build up to a position where you're able to get yourself way down, bum onto the heels entirely. We can even further load this with a goblet position. But for the moment, it's just about finding, okay, if pain is coming on about here, then I'm going to stop at this range here, and this is the range that I'm working with in terms of my body weight reps, just making sure that I'm building strength and not just working into pain, because that's not going to be useful over time. Okay, so let's build that strength over time, and then we can build to those deeper reps. As you go in towards those deeper reps, it's just more about keeping the knees nice and narrow. You're going to feel yourself really compress at the hips. You're going to feel yourself trying to keep that more upright position. And then, as I said, in terms of loading from there, we just load in a very easy goblet position. We could do this with a barbell, but probably not going to be the best thing on the slant board itself to really load this up massively. But you can see from here, just keep the dumbbell close to the chest. Narrow position again. Very slow, staying as upright as I possibly can. Really loading into the knees. Taking your time through the range. Feeling for where it feels comfortable. Okay, so plenty to go through on that and lots of benefits to be had in terms of getting into deep degrees of knee flexion. If you like the video, Be sure to like it. If you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section below or reach out to me directly if we're working together. If you think someone would find this valuable, be sure to share it with them. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, then be sure to follow the page as well. But for the moment, folks, I'll see you soon.